This video is for section 5.6. Our objective in this section is to use a general strategy for factoring polynomials. So this section is really about putting everything together that we've been doing since section 5.3. So our strategy when we see something that we have to factor, what we always want to look for first is a GCF. And if there is a GCF, we want to factor it out. And the reason we want to factor the GCF out first is that it generally makes the work easier later on if I have smaller numbers to work with. So if there's a GCF, factor it out first. Then what you're going to do is look at the number of terms. So if there are two terms, you want to see if it's a difference of squares. If there are three terms, you want to see if you can use guess and check or grouping. To factor into two binomials. And if it's four terms, you are going to want to use factoring by grouping. And then once you've factored something, what you always want to do is check the factors to see if any of them can be factored further. So even if your factoring is correct, if you don't have everything factored completely, then MyMathLab is going to mark it wrong. So you want to check your factors to make sure that there's no GCF or any other way that they can be factored further. So we're going to start by looking at example 1. It says to factor 2x to the third plus 8x squared plus 8x. So when I look at this problem, I see that there's a GCF of 2x. So all coefficients can be divided by 2, and x can come out because it's in each term. The smallest power on x is 1. So 2x is the GCF. And then remember, thinking backwards distributive property, I'm going to write what I need to multiply by 2x to get each term in parentheses. So I get x squared plus 4x plus 4 in parentheses. And now looking at that, I can see that that's something that can be factored. It's going to factor into two sets of parentheses. And two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 4 are going to be plus 2 and plus 2. And then the last thing that you do not want to forget is to put the GCF that you took out on the outside of the parentheses. It doesn't go away, so you still need to have it there. So that's going to be my answer. You'll see this in the book. If you enter it that way into MyMathLab, that'll be fine. But you could also write, since x plus 2 times x plus 2, they're the same factor, I can write that as x plus 2 squared. So either way, that's going to be the answer for example 1. So next you should do checkpoint problem number 1. Do this in your notes, check your answer in the notes that are posted, and then move on with the rest of the video. Next we're going to do example 2. It's pretty similar to example 1. The difference here is I have two variables, x and y. In this case, my GCF is going to be 4y. So I see that there's a single y in each of the three terms, so the y can come out in my GCF. And then what I'm going to have left is x squared minus 4x minus 5. So now what I have in the parentheses is a trinomial with three terms. And so I want to factor that using guess and check method where I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -5 and add to -4. That's going to be -5 and +1. And then don't forget, I need to have that 4y on the outside of my answer. So next you should do checkpoint problem number 2. It's pretty similar to checkpoint or example 2. Do this in your notes and then you can move on to the last example in this video. The last example here, this is 9b squared x minus 16y minus 16x plus 9b squared y. This is example 3. So I have 4 terms here, so that tells me that I'm going to be using grouping. However, if I try and just divide it into the first 2 terms, what I see is that there's nothing in common between 9b squared x and 16y. So I can't take any numbers out, I can't take any variables out, I'm kind of stuck. So for this one, what I need to do first is rearrange it, because there's other terms here that do have something in common with 9b squared x. The 16x has an x in common, and then this last term has 9b squared y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the order around here. I'm going to do that by switching these 2 terms, but you could also move minus 16x so that it's right next to 9b squared x. You should come out with the same answer if you do that. The work would just be a little bit different. So I'm going to put 9b squared x plus 9b squared y minus 16x minus 16y. So when I'm rearranging, I need to make sure whatever sign is in front of that term stays in front of that term, which is why I kept a plus sign here in front of 9b squared y and a minus sign in front of 16y. So now I can divide it into 2 groups and I can actually factor something out here. So for the first pair, I can take out 9b squared. That leaves me with x plus y. I can put x plus y over here, and that'll be a minus 16 on the outside. So now I can use my grouping. One group is going to be 9b squared minus 16, and the other group is going to be x plus y. Now, it's not done because when I look at this first set of parentheses, 9b squared minus 16, that's a difference of squares, so I can factor that. If you just enter this into MyMathLab, it's going to mark it wrong. You're not going to get any credit for that because it's not factored completely. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, 9, 16, those are perfect squares. I have b squared, so I can use difference of squares. Square root of 9 is 3, and then this is going to be b. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so b to the first. And then I'm going to have plus square root of 16 is 4. And then the exact same thing, but with a minus sign in the middle. So 3b plus 4 times 3b minus 4. And then the x plus y, I can't factor that at all, so that just stays the same. So this is the answer for example 3. So what you should do next is checkpoint problem number 3. Very similar to example 3. Do this in your notes, check your answer in the notes that are posted, and then move on to the homework.